into the Buried 2020 initiative and really just pick her brain on how she chose to get involved with it. So thank you so much, Maria, and we will bring you on board right now.
Hello.
Hi. So please just introduce yourself to our new listeners who, do not know you. Tell me a little bit about what you do and how you're involved in the 2020 Buried 2020 initiative.
Sure. So I am the president of a 501(c)(3) nonprofit called e-NABLE Alliance. We are part of the maker community. In our ecosystem, we're known for making, in collaboration with people who have limb differences, assistive devices. So typically, for the past 10 years, we've been known for creating 3D printable parts. They can be assembled by kids, typically in a classroom period. They're considered class 1 medical devices with exceptions by the Food and Drug Administration.
Oh, wow.
And this is a body powered hand. So when you bend the wrist, it lengthens the cords at the wrist and it shortens the cords at the fingertips. And that's what makes the fingers curl. So by bending their wrist, they're able to have a functional hand. If they don't have the ability to bend the wrist, then this block where they secure the static lines can be moved above the elbow. So you could have an elbow activated device, or it could be moved to the opposite shoulder. And so by leaning forward and pushing forward with that shoulder, you're stretching the cords across the back. And the muscle power that you're using is at the shoulder or the waist, not at the area of injury. And so those are also very successful devices. They have partial fingers. We have exoskeletons. And then there are also designs for the lower leg and the foot. There are a lot of tools for people who might have their hands but need assistance with things. And then
Right.
there are over 200 designs for people who need learning manipulatives because they are dealing with vision impairments. Anyone with PTSD, which could be all
Mhm.
of us at this
Yeah.
point, needs help with focus. And then they might just be tactile learners, which is perfectly fine. But we have collections for those. So during the pandemic, we adopted a second mission, which was disaster response, and we began
Mhm.
also creating open source medical supply. So that included the face shields and face masks, but also laryngoscopes, stethoscopes, microscopes, intubation boxes, kiosks for distributing immunizations, and even in some areas of our ecosystem, oxygen concentrators that are maker made and producing oxygen for hospitals and clinics. So it's really been an amazing effort. And because I am in the medical reserves and
Yeah.
counted on the makers to have my back, even in those first critical hours before they started making, they brought me supplies that would be typical of a makerspace. And I think it saved me and my team to have things like gloves and N95 masks and plastic sheeting.
Yeah.
So I'm dedicated to the making sure the maker community not only supports the e-NABLE projects, but that we support them in staying open and sustained and sustainable and healthy, including
Mhm.
their mental health. So that's how Joel and I got started with trying to help maker spaces survive.
Right. And you were involved in Barry 2020 as well, correct?
I was,
Oh,
yes.
so what exactly did you do in regards to time capsules?
Meeting of makerspaces,
Mm.
trying to find out what they were doing to stay open, what risks they had, and as part of that, we realized that everybody had a unique story to tell.
Mm.
That their survival strategies were things that were shareable, but that also together as a community, that we really needed to share what was happening to us and to support each other. So Joel began the Berry 2020 as a way of saying, let's make a time capsule of the things that symbolize what we've been through and let's bury the year. So, of course we could all see that it's an ongoing issue
Right.
and that for people who track their time according to, the school calendar,
Yeah.
or other factors of the community, for people like me who are still active in the medical reserves and still responding, it still feels like the same year. And
Right.
my sense of time is very much like Dali's paintings of clocks and the persistence of memory. I still wonder sometimes what year it is. And so the idea of having a time capsule that I could make for my community
Yeah.
became more a reflection on how is this community going to survive?
Right.
Because we were losing so many volunteers. I depend on makerspaces as places that volunteers and potential recipients can go to collaborate, and they were closing. My office, for this moved 4 times because landlords
Ah,
closed. They did not survive. The printers that I used are not reproducible because the electronics companies that made the electronics closed. And
wow.
so I began collecting this ephemera of things that were disappearing just to assert where is my bedrock. And then I began to realize that we were going to survive this, and I wanted my granddaughter to know why I wasn't seeing her,
Right.
and know that I was thinking about her this whole time. So I began collecting it as a personal time capsule for my family too.
That's really amazing. And why did you find it so meaningful to put together this? I know you were probably, it sounds like, away from your loved ones for quite a while when on the front lines and helping in these disastrous situations. So why was it meaningful for you to put this together?
I figured with my granddaughter, I wanted to capture that she had this wonderful childhood in this bubble of safety, and how hard people work to create that.
Right.
Um, so, she's not at an age where I can even really read to her. She's so small, but she's at an age where she'll want to show me something. She'll hold it up to the screen. She'll make the noise of that animal, and then she'll run away out of focus again. And so I started with a little plushy globe that I was looking forward to playing with her, and
Yeah.
the animals then that snap and button and tie and putting those in. And then then I started with these small little things that we could, the little bluebird of happiness, and all these little things that started to take on extra symbolic meaning, when almost like Christmas ornaments can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we started with that, and then I was showing, in order to stand up our phones so that I could see her, we had 3D printed these little dragons, and
Oh.
so that went in the time capsule. Um, my when I was not in the when I was not on active deployment, there's still this like quarantine kind of time. Like I wanted to make
Mm.
sure that I was healthy, and sometimes that wasn't enough time to go see anybody before you had to go back. So I started saving things that we were working on. So this little like flower petal kind of thing is actually a portion of a Ford airbag that was a material sent to us to make gowns. We made 60,000 gowns for Johns Hopkins Medical Institutions where I used to work. And then every time people used them and they wanted to adapt them a little bit, then you still had the rest of the 60,000 inventory for everybody to work on. It began to be a huge effort for people in the scouts and so on. So I wanted to account for where I was and to save all these little beautiful pieces as a way for her to have something tangible so that down the road it would start to make more and more sense. What people were doing, and maybe also why we were so anxious when she was so happy, because she really
Right.
was like the best medicine ever.
Really.
And yeah, I think all the kids were, and then the kids who were in working with me through scouts and robotics teams and so on. I wanted to represent them. That this was an adult anxiety and undertaking that they were working on with us as equals, and they were also as affected as we were by people who started to become sick or to uh, disappear from our lives. So I wanted to account for that. So I started collecting pictures of people and the mass cards from people who had passed away, like the leaders of our special needs scout group, or others. So I wanted to just kind of put in one place where the ephemera of what we were doing. It's,
And what did the time capsule look like? I know Joel talked a lot about hiding them in plain sight. using
Yeah.
objects that we, would normally use for something else and making them into time capsules. So, how were you creative with yours? What does yours look like?
So I wanted it to be friendly, and I wanted it to be something I literally could throw across the room if I was feeling really frustrated. So it was a soft sculpture globe.
Oh, I love
Um, and with you open up the zipper, and there are these little animals with, the things that animals that were also supposed to teach fine skills like the how to button, how to tie, how to snap, and
Yeah.
so on. But how to buckle. Every time you opened up one of these things, then you would find the mother and the baby kind of nestled together,
Yeah.
and it was such a friendly. And then they had an icon on the globe to show where the animal was from. So I thought that it would be a nice way for us to still feel interconnected and because and not just as a way of looking at statistics and trending variants
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
closures, but to bring people together. Um, that was something that I could hide in plain view. I had other chapters that I had invited to do this with us, and one of them put their time capsule in a rocket. The premise was that they were going to shoot it into the sun, but they all collectively agreed that they were going to keep it on the shelf because,
Yeah.
with their luck at that moment, they were afraid it would fall back and cause some sort of horrible nuclear
Yeah.
response. So,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then, and then the in Nepal, they were creating time capsules. So that was another one of our chapters that we work with that managed to stay open. And Robo Dojo, which is a place that I was still going frequently, even during the pandemic, they used water bottles, and the kids filled them up
Okay.
and made notes and things, and decorated them, and that was their way of lining the shelf with these wonderful, colorful, literal messages in bottles for them in the future, to show. So every time they saw that they had put these anxieties and observations in a bottle and left them on the windowsill, but they were still beautiful, especially together, and that they were still together. So it actually gave them hope.
Right.
So, so those were ways that our chapters responded, which was really great.
Yeah. And how did, I mean, yours specifically, because time capsules get lost all the time, how did you ensure that yours wasn't and that you always, remembered where it was? Because I know, again, as you said, this was a hectic time. It still feels like 2020 in some aspects. So, how can
Yeah.
you possibly remember where you put your time capsule?
So I kept our time capsule next to the printer. And so it was, as a globe, it was a great way of me kind of staying focused on a community that was bigger than me,
Yeah.
that was helping to hold everybody together. And so it, and it was, of course, as a kid-friendly soft sculpture, it looked like a toy. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to make sure that if we ever had the opportunity to get together, that I had it within arm's reach so that I could start playing with it and opening it up and putting things in. And I kept putting things in, thinking that that these toys are things that we were going to work on. So I even put inside like my pocket guide to first aid and my
Yeah. I
pocket
want
guide
to know,
to.
everything that you put into it because
Oh,
I know
really?
yeah, I know that they're kind of small, so you do have to be selective about what you're putting in, but I'm someone who gets excited and wants to throw everything in there, so
So, yeah, I agree, and so at first, I felt like I was trying to save the knowledge of the world. Like, if you find my time capsule, this will help you do first aid,
Right,
and
right,
this will help you read the sky and know if it's gonna rain or not. And, of course, the hiking and the backpacking, they were some of the few things that we could still do,
right.
collectively. Um, this was, a piece of the art for where we used to go hiking and walking around,
Uh,
and it felt at the time like DC was a really problematic place. I think
right.
at one point there was like 41 miles of barbed wire
Wow.
around it. It took me like 2.5 hours to drive across it because there were 5 checkpoints after the in January.
Mhm.
And so the other thing that my family did during the pandemic that became like a really sweet tradition. We had this little metal prayer box, and it was, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And I think that what spoke to us because I was, out before dawn to set up staging areas for the deployments. And my daughter was using my 3D printer to 3D print face shields for me and my team. And it felt like everybody was trying to be courageous and supportive, but
Yeah.
I thought that they were braver because they let me back in when I came home.
Oh,
So a lot of our little things that we tucked in were really requesting safety
right.
for each other and for the people we were trying to care for. For as a sign of the things that I was able to teach people using a virtual connection in order to stay connected to my pediatric oncology kids and create programming and kind of like a camp for them. We did things like flip books and all kinds of silly things. So this is an example that I tucked in there of flip books and how they work. We loved the whole Harry Potter thing. And then as an example of what education was like for my older kids, the required reading for the first years at University of Maryland was Demagoguery and Democracy. I think it was probably the first time they had really to think about democracy and that
Right.
they'd heard that word. So it was such a small little tome, to slip in there. So I tried every time I found something that just made me think, "Yeah, this is really happening now." I would if it was small enough to put in that little globe, I would put it in.
Yeah. So you accumulated like a lot of paper, a lot of books,
Mhm.
informational pamphlets, and then you said did you put the prayer box in your time capsule as well?
I do. And that's where it's going to reside, but I find that every once in a while my family still goes after it
Yeah.
and still puts
Yeah.
things in. And then when I was deployed, or when I was traveling, there was, we had these little things that we used to put photographs in, and as a keepsake. And
Yeah.
this is one of the ones that I gave people during the holidays that year, so that we could we could put those kind of mementos in and carry them in our pocket. I was a strong believer in pocket art. You could put your head in your pocket and find something that would inspire you or keep you grounded, or give you a 5-second vacation if it was just really hard at that moment. So the little silver albums that I had given family and friends, I kept one too. So when I don't have it in my things, I keep it in the time capsule as what I carried with me wherever I went.
Yeah.
So, yeah. S
So
so
you
it's a Go
use
ahead.
this as a way to preserve history and what you experienced during 2020 as well as 2021. Has it been kind of locked up, or do you still find yourself adding things as you go through this long experience that seems to be never ending?
Totally still adding to it. And a couple of times I have actually taken things out of it because I'm like, "I need this right now." So so the not just the albums to hold on to, people that, are missing or people that
Right.
can't be with me, but, at one point as a joke, I had put a roll of toilet paper in there, and, that is not in there right now. And, my hand sanitizer refill.
Of course, of
W
course.
so there were some things I was like, "Oh, this totally symbolizes this moment," and then about 3 weeks later, it's like, "They're still not in the stores, and I'm gonna take this out and use it
Oh,
and replace it later." So, um, the, uh, I plan on, putting in the 3D printed jig for the face masks, and
oh yeah.
I plan on putting in one of my face shields, that I've been using, in response, but, I haven't retired them yet. So, because I want them to see, what it was actually like. I used to love that about my grandparents' house, the things that they held on to as their, resources, during, like, planting victory gardens or, when, my grandfather was in, the World War II efforts or the WPA effort, and my uncle in Korea. So I used to love to go through these kits. My father came to America with 2 trunks, and I
Wow.
used to love to see what he thought would be necessary to bring with him, like a recipe for donuts. I could no. So my sisters and I started keeping a pandemic recipe book, but
I
right
love
now it's not in the time capsule, it's still in my kitchen, and we still
that.
make notes on it um, like, "This was so terrible, never make this again." It was just whatever was in the pantry before we were able to go back out, so it was something that we made with grape jelly,
Oh
and
my
I mean,
god.
it was,
So
like, totally like there's
cookbook.
nothing well,
I'm
it was
sorry.
totally
That's awesome. I haven't heard anyone do that so far. I really love that. It's very unique and innovative to the times that we're in because there was a lot of shortages. I remember going grocery shopping, not being able to find any ingredients when I even was comfortable to go grocery shopping. So we were like kind of, eating out of the cans and things that we found in our cupboards. So I like that a lot.
it was so funny because we would share recipes, and then we'd get together on Zoom, and it'd be like, "Nope, this recipe looks different every time I make it, and it looks different every time you make it." So, it was fun and sweet, but it
Yeah.
was, like, over a year before my family would get together. So, that the Zoom time and that cookbook were really ways to preserve it. The other thing, um, I saved a couple of receipts because at the very beginning, um, the medical reserves had told us, to stockpile for, shelter in place for 3 weeks, and then they changed
Yeah.
it to 3 months, and, so I knew that we were not going to have Easter if I didn't start
Oh,
buying right away, and
right.
just the ridiculous effort that we put into trying to reserve this one meal, just in case that became, a really special moment of comfort,
Yeah.
because nobody knew what to expect. Yeah, the ingredients for that Easter meal were part of my pandemic shopping at the beginning, so so
Wow.
I wanted to show her just, you know, how, um, how panicked we were and how certain we were that, it would work out.
Yeah, yeah, a range of emotions trying to put that into a time capsule for her to look at. Did you write any like personal anecdotes or anything like letters to your future self? Hopefully, in 2025, we're done with all of this. Who knows? But yeah, I know letters are very popular amongst time capsules.
Definitely. One of the inside cover of my field book, I wrote, about the, just the noise and the noise level. I could get a reading on noise levels, and there was no traffic in the air,
Yeah.
let alone on the roads or the highway, and all the birds that I could hear. I was able to list probably over 30 species of birds that I could hear that day. I had seen things that I hadn't seen in 15 or 20 years,
Wow.
and, just to tell her that, um, we could have all along just decided that we were going to give the earth a break and let the air clear and the water clear, and how quickly the earth had rebounded, so that, the it, in the it was almost like it was trying to be the balance in the universe and comfort us,
Yeah.
but to know that that if the earth could give us that much resilience on a problem that seemed just insurmountable, to take heart. So I remember writing that letter and just the list in the margin of as I heard each thing to check
Wow.
it off.
Yeah. It sounds like a really good form of reflection and therapy in a way, just to write all of these, feelings down. Hopefully, we'll revisit it one day and it'll be, a memory. But I know, and it's also very, the silence. The silence was extremely prevalent, especially for me. I mean, I live right next to like busy roads, and just hearing absolutely no one going through. Yeah, it was one of those moments that I don't think we'll be experiencing for a long, long time. It was kind of a shell shocking moment, and I think those are the most important things to put into time capsules. Kind of, give you a glimpse of what you were actually going through during that time frame.
Right, the animals that were walking around because we were all
Yeah.
so quiet. And, the other thing that about it, I remember recording temperature because
Oh,
the
really?
ther the thermometers that we had were only going to give us valid readings between 60 and 80 degrees,
Mm.
and it was 49 degrees outside. I mean, we were so cold. Just trying to figure out, you know, first of all, how are we going to get this thermometer open if we weren't given screwdrivers? And how are we going to put batteries in it if we hadn't been given batteries? And
Right.
the only thing that we'd gotten were the thermometers and deli gloves from the cafeteria line. Um, and just,
Wow.
that sense in those first two deployments that the social contract has been shredded and we're on the front lines without things that we need to protect ourselves. I
Right.
remember just my indignation writing that out, like, "We're never doing this again," and I tapped that actually last week,
Mm.
because we were talking about how do we build back, and it's like, yes, we could build back the national stockpile, but we have to build back, a digital stockpile of these designs so that
Mm.
we don't have to reinvent gears and wheels, and we don't have to reinvent so many of this supply, and then to have the materials we need for people to start 3D printing and micro manufacturing again or prototyping again, that is a lesson learned. Um, some of
Yeah.
those ideas came from my journal or from letters I wrote to people like you would not believe.
Yeah.
Oh, we have our deli gloves to protect ourselves.
Wow. And where were you? So you were deployed. Your deployment was where exactly?
So it was through the state health department, and initially it was with the Division of Contagious Disease. I had been planning a stress test of all
Mm.
of the Maryland hospitals for the middle of April,
Okay.
and I knew that the number of ventilators was a problem from our previous exercise. We didn't have enough ventilators for everyone on a plane in a theoretical
Sure.
situation. So we had to distribute the passengers from this theoretical plane into three different states. And now
Mhm.
I pushed on the scenario. What if there was a viral hemorrhagic? And so you would have an entire population, and what would your protocols be so that you could decrease the amount of stress on the medical workers? That
Right.
there were rules of engagement for that scenario, and they just had to exercise them with the limited resources they had. So I
Wow.
and so then we had a real problem with the real viral respiratory, and
Right.
so they moved me into monitoring and setting up the initial hotlines for people who had questions and to how to direct them to get medical care if they're already sick, and then I started with the deployment. So those were my initial assignments.
Wow.
It was I knew from e-NABLE on January 29th, the Hong Kong chapter asked me for 5,000 N95s for
Mm.
children and or as many as I could get for adults.
Yeah.
And on January 29th, they were also briefing the governors about the status of the virus.
Right.
So it was apparent on that day there were no more to buy. The market was gone, and that that gloves were disappearing. That anybody who was going to be dependent on just-in-time delivery to stock their clinics was already in the weeds,
Wow.
and the because of the civil unrest and the threat of the pandemic, the threat of the virus, the level of anxiety and depression amongst
Yeah.
the teenagers in Hong Kong and Taiwan and Japan, they were already it was already a severe situation. So um, so that it was a sentinel day to see what was happening in the nonprofit community
Mhm.
and to realize that we were in trouble.
Right. Right. And
So
how did you deal with that?
I wrote it down.
Mm.
I started letting people know, and I wrote it down, and I remember thinking that one of the things I wrote down was I'm not taking my family to church anymore because if people
Yeah.
were sick, I thought that's where they would go.
Wow.
So it was as a chaplain and as a person who is a Sunday school teacher and really engaged in my church, um, it was sort of that sense that that was part of my plan was kind of a reflection to me of how frightened I was that
Right.
I needed to
To
keep them
cut
safe.
Yeah, to cut something out that brings you so much comfort and joy, right? Going into these
Oh, our
environments. Yeah.
lifeblood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and maybe not the easiest decision to understand. So it was like over a year before I saw we would go to outdoor services, which I loved.
Yeah.
And the time capsule includes leaves and it
Yeah.
includes pressed flowers. And I how much I had enjoyed these services and putting those things in the program as part of how I really felt nourished by those programs by being
Yeah.
outside. But then to also um, realized that it was not something everybody got to do. They didn't get to go outside, and
Yeah.
they were stuck inside and watching on Zoom. So to just appreciate
The
the
luxury.
exactly and the
Yeah.
ministry that people had shown by creating even just streaming from
Right.
a cell phone that that community ended up being what you were able to build. And so for community, for some people, in a very real way, were the people who were able to log on from anywhere in the world. And I hope that they hold on to each other.
Yeah.
And even when they're back to a physical normalcy, sort of,
Yeah.
because my international um, contacts, over the course of the day became more connected to me than my neighbors hunkered
Wow.
down.
No, yeah. It makes sense because we're able to communicate with technology in ways that we had never been before.
Right, and I wanted to validate for, my granddaughter and for the other youth that are in our organization um, that their community being virtual, was real, and
Right. Yeah. Was still there even though we weren't able to, congregate and touch each other and hug and feel you could still feel it through the screens, which I definitely think was challenging at first. But you became grateful for it as the weeks and months passed on and you realize it's kind of all that we were able to get at the moment.
Right, so I think that that's why I picked the globe, and I
Yeah.
picked it in such a playful way
Love,
because that was just how I understood, my families are here and my families of choice are here
yeah.
and so on. Yeah. So one of them even, was who was working with me on the medical gowns. So she was putting these kinds of things together for Remembrance Day, making
Yeah.
posies out of our current warlike effort. And it was that kind of stress, to thank people for
Mhm.
being so interconnected and supporting us, even though they might have been physically far. That sense of internet and that sense of global family was so real. I think that's why the globe really spoke to me, and I really wanted my granddaughter to feel how real that was, and give that to her.
Yeah, and I guess that brings me to my next question of an opening date. Most people, when they do create time capsules, they choose an opening date. Do you have one planned? I know it's something that has been a little bit relaxed, adding to it, taking away. But for the future, for your granddaughter, is there a specific way that you'd like to gift it to her and have her open it?
I'd really like to give it to her on her 16th birthday,
Yeah,
because I think at that point you're sort of age. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
You can see the world with both lenses, and you feel so sometimes you feel invincible, and sometimes you feel too small for
right,
what you're being asked to do.
yeah,
And I want her to know that she came from, you know, uh, this marvelous bedrock of people that loved and welcomed her and only wanted to buffer some of these difficulties. And that if she was aware of them now, it was because we had confidence. In her abilities, and that she would know that she would make her own way, that history is going to rhyme. She's going to have something that's going to be similar to this, and she's going to find her way, and just like we did.
yeah. And how old is she? Was she born in the pandemic or prior to it?
Just before. So she had, yes, so she's 2. She had her 2nd birthday
Wow.
during right. So that's why the reading might have been challenging, but the shapes, the animals, the animal noises, the little songs, all those things made sense at the time.
Yeah. So she was born in 2019. Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Yeah.
So what do you think the world's going to look like when she's 16? I'm doing the mental math in my head, but I mean, it's
I
going to be completely different. She's going to open this and think, "Wow, I had no idea I was just a baby." But yeah, what do you think it will look like on its opening date?
I really hope that the groundwork that was laid by the nonprofit, the open source, movement, the open hardware movement, people collaboratively innovating and sharing the access to emerging technologies and
Mm,
this kind of informal education and service learning, being
yeah,
able to create immediate response to a local need, to create resilience in your home, like Kit did when she was making my face shields, or in
yeah,
your community, like when we were handing the face shields out. Um, I really want that to be normal. One
yeah.
of our chapters that they responded by making 1,000,000 face shields in the first 39 days. They
Wow.
made over 2,000,000 face shields, and they're still working on that. They're still working on the oxygen concentrators, and um, the in the I think when you look at the maker community, they made something like 25 million pieces of PPE. It's worth about $271 million. They did it with 3% of government funding, and you think, so they can't do that again.
Yeah,
There has to be a way for us to realize that if all of us are going to live as independently and as resiliently as possible, that it's okay to be interconnected. It's okay to hold some of things at arm's length, but it's okay to also be part of a really efficient
yeah,
distributed network when you need it. And I think I'd really like for her to know that any learning is good. Service learning is always a blessing that comes back to you, and that the micromanufacturing and the collaborative innovation that saved us, if it should be part of not only how community works, but how you learn.
right.
And so that if that lesson hasn't gotten passed on effectively, um, I'd love for her to know that that's how the women in her family roll, and
Yeah,
that she could be really good at
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And you think the world will be, teaching or using those lessons to kind of, because I know we're probably going to have some sort of pandemic again. So the time capsule with what you're including is trying to make that a bit easier, especially for your granddaughter to say, hey, this is what we did. These are lessons that we're passing down, the words of wisdom, the words of advice to make her life hopefully a little bit easier because who knows what's going to happen in the future. Am I right with that one?
Ab Absolutely. One of the other letters that I wrote at one point, it was because of some texts from my kids, and they said, "So what does this feel like?" And I said, "Well, we had the AIDS epidemic. We had the
Right.
HIV pandemic when I was in college." And I said, "It feels like that." Where you blame communities, and then governments, step up, and the machinery of medicine will come, become engaged. Um, but it's down to the communities. It's always down to the communities, and it's down to personal compassion. And so I wrote a letter saying that this technology is just a way for people to care for each other,
Right.
that and humanize it,
Yeah.
and make it equitable. So I'm hoping that time capsules can be very complex. Some people have made
Yeah.
very technological time capsules, and I hope that maybe I hid the vegetables in a soft sculpture. It should look playful and innocuous,
Yeah.
and be accessible. But I hope that when she looks at this and she realizes what it was like, that um, it will have been less frightening
Yeah.
as a way to introduce her to what we were trying to do and how afraid we are or were, and that the technology is not beyond her.
Right. Yeah. It's in reach. And I think, coming back to technology because everything is evolving at such a quick pace, you also have to think about the future of time capsule technology. And I know that one is very broad and also moving very quickly. So what do you think the future of time capsules is going to look like? And I know that's a big
Ah,
question, but it's always very fascinating for me to ask, especially as someone who's involved in 3D technology and utilizing the advancements we've made in society this thus far.
I didn't put a thumb drive in because I didn't believe that that technology would work
Yeah,
when, you know,
it
I
become
have
yeah,
exactly. And I also as I saw that things weren't being maintained, I have a very healthy respect for web rot. So,
yeah. Data rot
um
huge. Yeah,
right, so I really believed that, if I was going to pass on, um, the the message, that it had to be in a low tech way. Isn't that
yeah,
sad?
yeah.
But,
No, it makes sense. It does.
because I knew that I wanted to use technology to respond to the shredded supply chain,
Mm,
but in the end, I'm giving examples, and I'm putting down where the repositories were that were shared online, hopefully, trying to pick things that would be maintained,
yeah,
um, and ways that we did that. But, yeah, I deliberately tried to make my time capsule as low
it.
tech as possible because I didn't think the digital time capsule would survive.
Yeah,
Um, I thought that, and that's why I think I held on to physical ephemera because, it just felt like so much was disappearing. Offices were closed and things were shut down, and even the NIH 3D Print Exchange, when it started to share the designs for open source medical supply,
yeah,
it had the traffic to it increased like 6,000%. Like it was taken down by the number of desperate people trying to get the designs.
wow.
So I knew that, if I wanted to share a message, um, even during the day, I would have to write it down to pass it to someone,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the mindset there. The other people did share thumb drives, and there are sometimes capsules that are just a Christmas ornament with a thumb drive inside it,
Oh
and maybe
yeah.
some of the little things, and that's legit. I don't want to tell anybody that that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
but there's so many family albums and family photos, and even our first attempt at a family recipe book that are inaccessible as zip drives and floppy disks and
Yeah.
things that, I tried to turn away from that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think a lot of people are recognizing, how quickly we go from device to device. I have now the iPhone, which there's the new one out so soon, and you feel like everything is ancient that you're using. But I know there's a lot of amazing companies that are emerging in technology that are able to, save anything you want, shield it from data rot, and actually put it into these libraries, which is where Joel is listed in our library now under the Berry 2020 initiative, which is amazing. Which you guys are there as well. But yeah, the company actually Not Forgotten, the one sponsoring this podcast, they are able to save anything digital for up to 300 years. So I think what we're doing as a society is really impressive with technology and how we recognize the web rot and the data rot and how we want to shield the things that we love from those, including videos from people. And I know you spoke a lot about people that had passed away during COVID. What are you to do with all of these amazing, precious, moments that you have on your phone of them, right? You want to save those in some capacity. So as much as we love, physical time capsules, I think that digital time capsules are the future. And I think that we're kind of going towards that way. What do you think?
I think you're right, and there are a couple of things. One was that, in the Government Blockchain Association,
Right.
I'm the chair for the Digital Identity Working Group, and the idea of that immutable timeline was something
Hmm.
that was really appealing. Um, Being able to create NFTs that didn't have the mistake of the early ones where the files moved, and then what did you actually buy? Um, but to utilize the interplanetary file system as a permanent, way of holding your assets, was important. The solid movement with pods that you would
Mm,
keep and micromanage access to. And then I was just at a dark sky site in North Carolina, very close to Joel,
mhm.
where where they're using that to store data as you know d- a so that it's a repository that's repeated in other places, so that should something happen to one, the
Right.
others will be
The
there.
back. Hmm.
Exactly, and that it's because it's in a natural bowl, there's no signal going in, there's no cellular to get anything out, you had to use a satellite, um,
Right.
and so, it would be protected from, EMP or, solar flares and other things. So, yes, there are definitely, repositories where these digital assets and treasures will be preserved
Right.
and that there is, as long as we have a way to access it, a way to um, be able to interface with it, even if it's a virtual machine pretending it's something from 1995.
Yeah.
um, there's always a way, and to not give up on the premise that something that might seem charmingly out of date is probably still something you can access and open. So yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, because I think what you've done is taken a really personal approach to a time capsule, which is my favorite way to go about it. You know, injecting as much emotion as possible.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of a mush, so that's how I am. But I would absolutely love, if I was your granddaughter, to have a video of you talking about your experience going through this, or like just a journal entry of you speaking to a camera, and then on her 16th birthday, she's able to actually watch that video of you in real time, shot in 2021, whatever, and be able to get a sense of not only what you're saying, but also the way that you're saying it, your facial expressions, these things that cannot be translated through flat media. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, hearing how someone's voice, their tone up and down, the way their face lights up when they're talking about something, which obviously yours has lit up talking about, the hopeful messages and the things that kept you going during this tough time. I would absolutely love a future where we can kind of look up video messages from our elders, and they're telling us things that we need to know that we can't learn from these books. Of course, she can, learn from a pamphlet, but to have her own grandma, tell her step by step would be a really beautiful, irreplaceable video. I would love that if my grandma did that. And I know I made her do a video of something similar, just talking about her life and her upbringing and some stories,
Oh,
so that I can show my grandkids when they inevitably, unfortunately, will not get to meet her. She won't live to like 200, but she'll be there forever in that library. So I think there's a lot of room for growth, and I think just always something to think about when we're kind of in technology. Everything is always changing. We think we have the highest form of whatever we're using, but there's always something else in the making.
I think that's beautiful, and it's true. We want to hear their voices. We want
Yeah.
to see their faces. So I'll think about that. I hadn't. You might have me put a thumb drive in there or
Yeah.
a
I
URL in there anyway.
don't even know it exists, and that's why we kind of talk about that as well, because so many people that come on this podcast are so strictly physical, they can't even imagine a world in which we could save video to that extent. And it's pretty cool that like that's actually here now, and in 2022 almost, we're kind of going through this. But it doesn't take away from the fact that physical time capsules are enormous. They're still such a huge part of the library that you guys are now in, the World Cat. So what you did through Joel is cataloged on the World Cat, which is the world's largest library catalog, and that could be found if you just type in the World Cat and you type in buried 2020, and you'll see it. So that's really exciting. But I also wanted to ask, since it seemed like you had so much going on, you were juggling so many different things. What is some advice you can give to someone who wants to make a time capsule? They might be a little overwhelmed. They don't even know where to start.
Just start with your day. Start with, I think sometimes the most important things you can think of, the thing that you fall asleep thinking about, the
Yeah,
thing that what you wake up thinking about, the that or the things that you wake up thinking about, the ones that make you want to stay in bed and the ones that push
yeah,
you out of bed. Just start there to say that this is, these are the northern stars and the monsters in my anxiety closet, and
yeah,
because that combination it's not only something that, if it's shared, it will be so humanizing and encouraging that that's beautiful. And if it's something that is unique then it needs to be captured because it's a kind of pain that you can't just dismiss. It's something that you really need to show, um, the in the reality, what was relevant at that moment, because those kinds of things change the way people make decisions. It
Right.
changes the way people interact and trust each other, and it's such a metric. So I would just say, start with that, and then look at the pocket litter that you have. For us, our pocket litter was, the the uh, the remnants, the artifacts of making PPE, which was an existential crisis, and then taking those as crafts to make beautiful mementos that we would even share. And so, and when I looked at the pocket litter, I was like, wow, okay, I'm never going to have this kind of trash again. It's not valuable to anybody else at the moment,
Yeah.
but it's the kind of thing that puts a marker down on, where I am and when. And then the other thing would be that you're the only one that's going to see things in that day. So even if there are no words to witness, because that is so important. I just took some snapshots about, what about the birds that I heard, or the recovery of the planet that just within my grasp, within what I could touch.
Yeah.
But I was the only one that was going to see, these animals and these things, because everybody else was hunkered down, and I wanted people to know that these things happened. So those, I would say, just to realize how important your witness is, even if there are no words. I don't
Yeah.
know, is that okay?
Yeah, I love that. I feel like it's like start small and start personal. I love that. And I had a lot
Yeah.
of entries of just the way that I was interpreting it as well. So I think each person's unique experience is incredibly powerful and worth saving and passing down, especially to your family
Mhm.
members who might, really resonate and see things the same way.
And what you did for fun and what you did with food, I think that food is such a tangible
Yeah.
tradition and system that, um, and it's also something that's easy to focus on, and it's repeatable.
Yeah.
If people wanted to get back in your shoes, people, I know, working at the museums that I've worked at, I love smelling the old perfume, and I love tasting the old flavors of, authentic dishes. I love the books about, what did this president eat, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
what was served at the, and for people to see how that was such a reflection of the supply chain and the interconnectedness or the failure was, um, it made me appreciate some of the cookbooks and alterations I found in my grandmother's cookbook that I had never really noticed before. And so the same thing, people can do just by documenting their everyday. They're documenting something that will never happen again, and to have fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the funniest part. In this kind of situation, it is the most important thing is to have fun and to see this as a silver lining, giving us something to kind of power through, and we can look back one day and say, I can't believe we lived through that, but we did, and here we are. And
You
I'm
know,
hoping that that is kind of the case as we keep going when it feels like it's like always around the corner.
yes, absolutely. There's some other things that we had in our time capsule, but it's such a dark sense of humor. I
Yeah.
can't even bring it up here.
I know a lot of people have gotten by with dark sense of humor, so don't feel it is really to each their own. I know my brother is definitely more of a dark humor, so that never bothers me. But I mean, it's one of those things that you just have to experience. And I know I like in a weird way, I do like how collectively we can all turn to each other and say, how was 2020 for you? Or like, how, what about that? That was crazy. And we could all kind of resonate because at a certain time, your granddaughter, when she's 16, she's opening up her time capsule. She didn't experience it. She's not going to know. So it is really interesting that we have this whole kind of generation of time of people who can resonate with one another no matter what, from any background. We still have
Mhm.
that shared experience, which is kind of unifying in a way. So I'm trying to, pull out some positives of the whole experience. But I think projects like Barry 2020 are, the perfect example of what I'm talking about. Just leveling down on that unity and that community, even though it is over technology, and they're not, right next door or right in your living room.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny when I think about some of the things that we tried to do for the
Yeah.
first time because there was time and did it badly, like some of my early knitting, oh my god, but, anyway, but I tried, and so, maybe that's going to be something that I tuck in there, like, I tried learning this for the first time because I had
Yeah.
time to do it, or, um, I guess the other thing, would be that, um just the lifeboat of people or memories that you can assemble and stick in a time capsule. I think I took for granted that everybody would remember when the CDC said, "Well, if you don't have a face mask, just use a bandana or a T-shirt," and it became a joke
Yeah.
amongst the medical reserves and the medical community. It's like if you managed to get a 3-layer cloth mask, it was like hashtag better than a bandana. It's like, oh my god, just the fear. Um, and so, I think that some of my jokes might not make sense until you see that this was actual government recommendation.
Right. You got to include that little snippets from the CDC website that you can kind of scrapbook a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm realizing now there might be some more scrapbooking. The other thing my family used to joke about was, when we talk about 2020 and they say, "You're studying it, what quarter are you going to be an expert in?" Like where are you going to focus your energy? And people used to laugh because it's like there's too much for a quarter. I'm just going to focus on June.
I know, right? Yeah, it was just ever changing so quickly.
Really was. So it's okay not to capture the whole thing, right? It
It
just
is. No,
you
it
can.
really is. For anyone that wants to start, I mean, think about, I guess, the month that resonated with you the most. Mine was, my second birthday in lockdown and kind of sitting down. I just talked to myself in the camera and talked about what I was experiencing and feeling and kind of where I thought the world would be heading in. And I'm going to watch that in 5 years and see how right I was or wrong. But I think it's a good experience, and it's very similar to, digital journaling and just being able to look back at yourself, because I know I'm gonna watch this and be 5 years older and think, wow, you really went through that, and maybe something else crazy is going on. I mean, I nothing surprises me at the moment anymore, so I'm just kind of waiting for it all to reveal itself, and see where our country is headed to. Because I have a lot of friends globally who are experiencing much different, day-to-day lives, like in Australia, for example. So it's it's just crazy to think about, what we're experiencing on the daily. And I hope things have settled down a little bit by you, so that you can kind of sit down and put some positive things as well into the time capsule, maybe like little hobbies that you were able to get if you had spare time. um
Oh,
but
yeah. Maybe I'll 3D print a cookie cutter for the year and stick that in. It's funny talking to you, I realized that, the time capsule for me was as much about, values as what was happening and just asserting the value of childhood in
yeah,
the midst of all this. So, I hadn't really thought about that too much, but I think in the end, that's what the time capsule is. It doesn't even matter if you try to capture what's actually happening, but how you feel and what you're doing, what you valued at that moment would
yeah,
be enough. Yeah.
it's always enough. I think just even putting it together, trying, putting your best out there is more than enough. And I know anyone that makes one, the only regret people have really is not making one, and just
That's so true.
not taking the time out to just put something aside. I mean, even I came across so many old journals of mine during quarantine where I was thinking, wow, like I'm really glad that I wrote these, even though I'm talking about some crush I had and some stupid thing that probably at the time felt like the end of the world. I'm really grateful that I had something tangible to remember those moments when, your memories get a little blurry. We go through life and there's so much other stuff going on. You kind of forget about these moments. I will not forget about 2020 and the things that changed while in quarantine, but I know that I'll be able to kind of look back and tell my kids about it using all these things that I put aside for them. It sounds like you're going to be doing the same thing with your granddaughter. So I think it's a really
Mhm.
wonderful project. And I honestly thank you for putting something together that we can even, have this discussion about.
Oh, I'm so flattered that you wanted to hear and you wanted to see how we tried to include all these layers of our lives, the nonprofit, the politics, the political stickers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, all those things that we decided that we were going to put in there to capture the moment. I think that it's so sweet that you that you see it as part of a larger tapestry. So
Oh,
thank you.
yeah. No, of course. And thank you so much for joining. I know we had some tech issues last time, but I really
That's
appreciate
nothing.
it. This was a really amazing interview, and you can come back anytime if you guys add to it. You make this a tradition and you want to do another one. We're always here to pick your brain and have a conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I know our listeners are very grateful to hear from you as well.
Oh, well, thank you, everybody. And good luck. I want to see there's time capsules, so I'll go look on your site.
Okay. Thanks, Maria.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye. Okay. Oops, there I am. So another great interview with Maria. Really wonderful to talk to someone else who's so passionate about this experience, creating the time capsule, and also just reflecting on how important it was to her. So if you guys are listening and you still want to create your own, start small, get personal with it, and I guarantee you will not regret making one. So thank you again for tuning in. I believe this was the last podcast of 2021, so we will see you next year. Have a great holiday. Stay safe.